Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the fair. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kate Toombs. I've been part of this community for 26 years now, and for many years I was a professor at Baylor University, and so I'm passionate about education. And at the time I retired, I began to become concerned because the high school students who were entering college, I found out they were ill-prepared to do college work. In particular, their literary skills were not developed to the point where they could easily express themselves or write papers or read books that at one point were standard literary or philosophical texts. And my colleagues tell me that things have deteriorated since then. So I've been looking at the research on public education, and what I want to do in the first part of the seminar is to focus on 5 areas of concern with regard to public school education. And just so you know where I'm going to go, I'm going to talk about academic decline, the effects of the COVID pandemic, the switch to computer-mediated learning, the mandatory imposition of special interest curricula, and the skyrocketing rates of violence. And I have to warn you, it's not encouraging, but I think it's important for us to know the specific details so we know what we're facing. I was reminded that in ancient times, if you didn't like the message, you killed the messenger, but we're not going to do that today. But then once I've given you all the bad news, I'm going to give you the good news, because what I'm going to do is propose that there is a solution, and that the solution requires an exodus from the system and a shift in goals and practices. And this is an approach that our community has taken for almost 50 years. And so I'll be able to share with you what we have done and to share with you the benefits that we have found for our children. So I'm going to begin with academic decline. You know, even though the ACT and SAT college tests are now easier than they were 20 years ago, the scores continue to go down, especially in reading and writing. And in 2023, the ACT scores were the lowest in 30 years. I read a piece written by a tutor who tutors students to take these tests. She said she had a list of 66 test words, and only 1 in 200 students could define 1 or 2 words. In 2022, every year, the National Assessment of Educational Progress puts out the nation's report card, which measures students across the nation. They sampled over 200,000 4th and 8th graders, and in 2022, 2/3 of 4th and 8th graders were not proficient in reading, and only 36% of 4th graders and 26% of 8th graders were proficient in math. And that was the steepest decline ever in math. And the US Secretary of Education publicly said that the results were appalling and unacceptable. And that translates into students going into college. I just read an article in The Atlantic which was titled "Elite Students Who Can't Read," and multiple professors at the elite universities said that students no longer arrive able to read books. And one high school student said that she had never been required to read a whole book in high school. And it's not that they don't want to, they said, it's that they don't know how. Well, what happened with COVID? Well, the COVID pandemic was a disaster for education. Many commentators put children 2 years behind. So the federal government has invested billions of dollars in order to reverse the decline. But unfortunately, a 2023 report of test scores from 2.7 million students in grades 3 through 8, 20,000 public schools, said that the learning gaps were not closing, but actually they are widening. Well, what about computer-mediated learning? In the past decades, there's been a universal shift to computer-mediated learning. As far back as 2013, nearly all middle and high school students were required to use mobile devices for their school work. By March 2021, 90% of schools provided a device for every middle and high school student and 84% for elementary students. The problem is that research shows that despite the amount of money we've spent on this, there's been no educational gains. In fact, they've been negative in math, reading, and research skills. You know, when the computers were put in, we thought it would revolutionize learning, that students would be able to look up information, search libraries across the world, and do that kind of thing. The problem is that's not what students are doing. What they're doing in class is chatting, looking at social media, looking at YouTube. 2/3 of teachers say that the technologies distract rather than improve learning. 92% of college students say that they text and browse and look at social media during class. And teachers also say that the amount of information that students can access now is an overload, that they can't pick out the relevant information, that they'll look up the information, but if they do a research project and you say, why did you use that information, they don't know, and they don't retain the information, which actually is the case with all of us. We look up something on Google and we find out the information, and then we turn off Google and we completely forget it, and that's what's happening to students. We've also found out that students, because of being on computers, they have a very short attention span now, because everything is this rapid information distraction going from one thing to another. They observed students who were supposed to be studying for 15 minutes, and they lost focus every 3 minutes. Well, what about other factors affecting the quality and content of education? Over the last decade, multiple states, multiple school districts have mandated special interest curricula that go under the names of critical race theory, critical social justice. 7 states are requiring K-12 schools to include instruction on gender identity as early as 2nd grade, and in many cases, parents cannot opt out even if they deem the content of the class to be inappropriate for their children. California has just passed a law that forbids schools from informing parents if their child has decided to change their identity in school, unless the child gives permission, even if it's the case that the child is counseled to begin risky hormone treatments. They did a study, a recent survey showed that at least 6,000 schools block educators from informing parents if their child has decided to change their identity. So the question is, how widespread are these teachings in school? Well, a recent survey of a nationally representative sample of 1,500 Americans aged 18 to 20, so they've graduated from high school, 90% of them were exposed to the pro-critical race theory concepts, 74% to radical gender concepts, and in 7 of 10 cases, this information was presented as fact or as the only respectable view to hold. Well, unfortunately, we also can't talk about public education without talking about the increasing violence that is occurring in schools. As of October 2024, there have been 69 school shootings where at least one person was shot. There were 82 such incidents in 2023, which was an increase from 13 in 2010. In 2021-22, the US Department of Education noted that there had been over 850,000 violent incidents in public schools. So public schools now, the standard procedures are to have armed security officers on site, to have multi-hazard operation plans, silent panic alert buttons in every classroom, and weapon detection systems. In 2023, more than 1,150 guns were seized on K-12 campuses before they were used. I actually just read an article by a third grade teacher called What I Learned in School Today. She talked about the fact that the teachers there have to have live shooter drills where they'll hear fake gunshots, footsteps rushing down the corridor trying to get into their room. She said she has to do the math as to whether she can get 27 8-year-olds out of the classroom before the shooter reaches the room. The kids are not present when they do the live shooter drills, but they are instructed as to what to do if a shooter comes into their classroom. So she says that the same child whose eyes were wide listening to a storybook, their eyes are now wide with fear about a person with a gun coming into the room. And she said, how insane is it that I'm standing in front of my third graders trying to prepare them for the threat of a gun in their classroom? There's another form of violence in public schools that is endemic now, and it's cyberbullying. According to the American Academy of Pediatrics, cyberbullying is one of the most significant risks for teens that cause depression, anxiety, and sometimes, tragically, suicide. 1 in 3 high school students say that they've been cyberbullied. 61% of teachers say they observe instances in their classroom, and it increases with grade level. 1/5 of upper grade level teachers occur that cyberbullying occurs frequently or very frequently in the classroom. The problem is that the children can't get away from the bullying unless they give up their phones, and they can't give up their phones because that's the only way they communicate with anybody. Well, there's much more to say about the negative process of socialization that occurs when most children away from most of the day away from home, and all their interaction is peer-to-peer without adult supervision, and they spend 6 hours a day on social media and unsupervised online engagement. The one thing we do know is that research studies show that this generation of children have alarming rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide. Well, that's the bad news. So what can we do? Well, I believe that there is a solution, and it's a solution that we have found. And the solution is to bring the children home under the control of the parents and re-envisage the way we teach our children. This is a solution our community has followed for almost 50 years. When the community began in New York City, they recognized that homeschooling was necessary for the preservation of Christian values and culture. And when their freedom to educate was threatened, they fought and won a court battle that set the precedent in Texas for the liberties now enjoyed by over 750,000 homeschooled children in Texas. Prior to the trial, the judge, who had a degree in education, told them that he was going to rule against the community. However, after he'd heard all the evidence and looked at the program, he dismissed the case and said, "This is the finest thing for children I have ever seen." I should say that I come as an outsider to this issue. I can take no credit at all for the vision and effort that has gone into the program. And when I first became part of the community, I had never heard about I knew nothing about homeschooling. And given my immersion in the university culture, I had a very narrow view of what education should look like. So I was concerned whether the children here were receiving an optimal education. But now that I've been involved in a very small way with the program, I teach a seminar every year, I can tell you that the children here are better educated than the majority elsewhere. As an example, the essays that I receive from the students in my seminar are frequently superior in quality to the ones that I receive from the undergraduate students. So what I want to do is I'm going to share in very broad terms 5 aspects of the program that are distinctly different from public education and the benefits that we see in our children. And these are the intentional goals of the program, the home and community context, the shift from abstract to relational, experiential learning, and reality-based rather than screen-based knowledge, the direct involvement with nature, and the emphasis on sustainable skills such as crafts. Now, I'm not going to go into too much specific detail about the content of the program, but Amanda is going to give a seminar here tomorrow at 1, I think it is, called A Day in the Life, a Holistic Approach to Homeschooling. So if you're interested, you can come to that and she will have more specific information. So what about the goal? The first thing that the founding members of the community asked was, what is the goal of education? What are we educating for? And as believers, we have different goals and a different model from secular society. We want to prepare our children to develop Christian character, responsibility, and to give them the resources that will equip them for a lifetime of learning and to find their place in intentional Christian community. And we want this to be the focus for their whole life. So the overarching narrative that provides the context and founding principles for education is a biblical, God-centered narrative as opposed to the secular, human-centered narrative of public education. Back there are several books that I'll refer to later, but Blair Adams in his book, Education Exodus, has made it very clear that the goal of the founders of public education system was to mold citizens to fit into the reigning political and social state systems and to transmit the values, attitudes, and norms of a particular worldview. And that worldview promotes a relativistic and naturalistic perspective and rests on human-centered rather than Christ-centered view as the ultimate source of values. In the biblical view, there is a God-inspired purposive design to life that includes certain givens regarding human nature and existence and provides patterns of living that give stability, meaning, and purpose. And this is in contrast to the secular view that there are no givens, no transcendent standards, everything is in flux, and we can arbitrarily choose values and lifestyles. It's very important to recognize that there is no such thing as a value-neutral education. Secular education is not value-neutral, which has become more clear lately, I think. For decades, prominent educators stated that the purpose of education was to convert children away from the religious belief of their parents so they would make good citizens. We want to note that actually the founding fathers saw the religious upbringing as the foundation for good citizens, so we are educating children to be good citizens. So the second thing that's very important is the home context. It's always been our conviction that the people most qualified to teach are the parents. No one knows the child as the parent does. No one cares for the child like the parent does. Education in the home context is very different from the one-size-fits-all approach of public education. Children learn at different rates, have different needs, different challenges, and these can't be met in a context with multiple children from multiple social backgrounds and the need to meet standardized goals and timetables. In our culture, we presume that life can only be handled by experts. If you're a kindergarten teacher and you want to teach 5 and 6-year-olds, you have to have a 4-year degree in education. So the question is raised, do parents have the necessary expertise? Well, at the beginning, the founders of our community were confident that any responsible parent could learn along with the child, and that proved to be true. Over the years, our homeschool program has grown and expanded. We have multiple educators who are members of our community. We've developed a curriculum. We have homeschool advisors in all our small homeschool groups. We have tutors. We have group workshops. We have seminars. We have regular evaluations of the students, and we all help each other. I will now tell you a secret about expertise. College professors do not have a degree in education. When I taught my first class, I had never taught a class. That is true of all graduate students. The other thing that will happen is that the department will decide they need a new course, say on environmental ethics, and you will be assigned to teach the course. And so you know nothing about environmental ethics. So what do? You read a chapter ahead of the students. So that sounds familiar, right? Learning in the context of the home makes learning a central part of life. So life is not fragmented into separate areas of school, work, leisure, with no connection between them, and each family member in a different location and in a different area of activity. Children grow up within the relational order of familial authority and a hierarchy of different age groups rather than simply peer-to-peer interaction. Yielding to peer authority robs a child of personal responsibility. And I think, for example, of the number of children who are persuaded to band together to cyberbully another child by their peers. Peer grading also stunts a child's maturation and promotes adolescence. So when I spoke at our high school graduation, I reminded our students how blessed they were to carry out education in the context of close, enduring relationships, mother, father, grandparents, teachers, all of whom know them as the unique individual who they are, and all of whom are dedicated to their physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. This is very different from a public, private, or college education. Though I cared deeply about my students, I saw them 3 times a week for maybe 1 or 2 semesters, and then I rarely saw them again. And of course, being in the home context removes children from the violence that's endemic in the public school system. And because we are intentional about our use of technology, and our children do not have cell phones, they're not suffering the disastrous mental effects of social media. Okay, with regard to learning, we have adopted a relational approach as opposed to the purely abstract accumulation of knowledge that is characteristic of public education. The problem with abstract academic learning is it seems to have nothing to do with daily life. So while children may have watched a video on the Amazon rainforest, they can't identify the tree in their backyard. Different subjects, environmental studies, math, chemistry, English, all seem totally unrelated to one another and have little practical importance. So a lot of young people disengage from learning. So what we do is we combine academic and experiential learning so that students grasp that their academic skills have practical application. For example, doing botany and biology and caring for the garden rather than simply learning about them in a textbook or online, or using their observations of nature for writing an essay, painting a picture, or using their math skills to calculate a length of yarn for warping a loom to weave cloth. In this regard, we do not engage in computer-mediated learning. We don't use technology in the classroom. Our technology in school is books. So the emphasis is on literary skills, reading, writing. We want children to read extensively, to consider different perspectives, different worldviews. We want them to be able to critically evaluate different ideas and to be able to express themselves. With regard to the combination of academic and experiential learning, in addition to our academic curricula, this year our high school students had access to 69 different courses and internships by community instructors. I'm not going to read the range, but the range was extraordinary. Craft workshops, economics, writing workshops, painting workshops, bread baking workshops. There's a list over where we have our education that you would be able to see. And this is made possible by a team of 61 instructors who volunteered their time to impart this knowledge to the students. With regard to experiential learning, much of what we learn through doing. A professor of neurology wrote that instructors in medical school are having a very difficult time teaching students how the heart works as a pump because the students have no real-world experience. They've never worked on a car or a fuel pump. A surgeon who took one of our woodworking classes here said he wished that those he teaches about hand surgery took a woodworking class using hand tools because they'd have a much better idea about the workings of the hand. So another integral aspect of our program that is different from public education is the involvement with nature as a part of daily life and education. The purpose, of course, is to learn sustainable skills so that we can take responsibility for providing the essentials of life for ourselves. Most families here have small garden plots. Some have animals, chickens, which enables them to produce food for their family and share with neighbors and the elderly who are not able to do that for themselves. In our techno-industrial society, this generation of children grow up in a completely denatured environment. We see this when we host school groups to the farm. We usually host about 5,000 children a year, and most of them do not know where food comes from, except from the grocery store. Most children, their access to nature is only through the medium of screen. And this influences what is considered and what is relevant to them. They don't want to play outside away from technology. Teachers say that when you take children out to nature, they're used to discovery-type programs, so they find it very boring because in discovery-type programs, something is always happening. Animals are always jumping out of the woodwork, and they're not in the real world. An executive at Disney World, at Animal Kingdom, said that people complain that the real animals are not as interesting as the robotic animals. We actually know somebody who lives in Dubai, which is a technology-saturated environment. When her child saw a real dog, a live dog, for the first time, she said, "Wow, how many batteries does that thing take?" We have found that the most meaningful way to connect children to nature is to have them directly participate in growing food and raising animals, which they actually love to do. And in addition, we have found that in addition to the material benefit of providing nutritious food for the family, we have found that there are social, physical, and spiritual benefits for our youngsters. In the first place, it impresses on them the wonders of God's creation when they see a baby chick hatching or a newborn foal and they watch the plant growing from seed. It also helps them to develop important character traits, patience. Things don't happen instantly in the garden, not like if you're playing Farmville on the computer. It teaches them perseverance. They have to keep going over an extended period of time because not everything is going to go according to plan. You have to allow for the uncertainty of nature. It also teaches them personal responsibility because they have to feed and water the animals every single day. And it also gives them physical benefit, provides physical activity at a time when obesity is a problem for 14.7 million youths aged 2 to 19. In addition, small-scale endeavors, such as the family garden plot, provide an opportunity for family-oriented activity. All the family can work together, join together to plant seed and harvest. Interestingly enough, multiple research studies show that there is a beneficial relationship between nature contact and children's cognitive, behavioral, and mental health. It's also been shown to be effective in reversing ADHD symptoms at a time when attention deficit disorder is now the most diagnosed neurodevelopmental disorder in children. And also, people working with children who are addicted to the internet have found involvement with nature to be helpful in providing alternative, meaningful activities that these youngsters actually embrace. So another distinctive feature of the program is the focus on traditional crafts. In addition to their academic schooling, our students attend a wide variety of workshops in traditional crafts. These skills were part of the home economy in colonial times, and they used to be passed down from parents to children, but they've now been largely lost. When our community started, nobody knew how to do these skills. The first generation learned how to do them, passed them to the second generation, and now we're to the third generation of children who know how to do these skills. These crafts, of course, are not just a hobby. The purpose is to develop sustainable skill to support the family, home, community. And the goal is to develop cottage industries so we can bring the fathers home, so the fathers can work from home. And we do have fathers who have their own home workshops. And we've also found it encourages character skills, patience, perseverance, attention to detail. And we have a saying here, it's not what the boy does to the wood, it's what the wood does to the boy. We've also found that the craft workshops encourage intergenerational relationships because all the crafts are taught by community craftsmen who have personal relationships with the children. So it weaves the lives of young and old together. Parents will take workshops with their children. Fathers and sons will be in the wood workshop, and then they'll work on their crafts at home together. Older children teach younger children the crafts in the home. And the constant intergenerational fellowship encourages our students to carry on these relationships outside of their purely educational time. We have young people who go to nursing homes, visit nursing homes regularly. Young people regularly help elderly people in our community with chores. An elderly lady in our community was dying of cancer and she couldn't sleep at night. So a group of our young people volunteered to go and sing for her through the night. And they said that the experience had changed their lives forever. Even our young children will come. When my husband was dying of cancer, young children came and brought him drawings that they had done. When he died, one little 7-year-old said, "Oh, I wished he hadn't died. I had a lot more things I wanted to give him." So even our youngest children are growing up with an understanding that there are seasons in life, real life, not virtual life. Of course, for us, character training is an integral aspect of education, as opposed to a model that focuses on amassing of information in different areas of study with no attention to character. Over 150 years ago, Ralph Waldo Emerson gave a lecture at Harvard University that ended with the words, "Character is higher than intellect." He was worried that institutions that were originally founded to teach how to be good as well as literate would abandon the first goal to concentrate on a narrow book learning with no connection between ideas and lives as we live them. His concern was well-founded because the formerly religious universities, which are now secular, Robert Coles, who's a professor at Harvard teaching courses in ethics, wrote an essay which he titled "The Disparity Between Intellect and Character." And he talked about the experience of a student coming to him who was in one of his moral ethics classes, telling him she was quitting Harvard because the students who made A's in all the ethics classes, it did not translate into moral behavior. She was working her way through Harvard and cleaning the rooms of students who she was in class with, and she said they forgot how to say please and thank you, and they were routinely rude and ugly towards her. So one of the questions we're always asked is, so what about university? Do your children go to university? And once again, we want to ask, what is the goal? What are you educating for? All my university students were told this was the only means to have a successful life. The priority was to be competitive in the business market, to be a success according to societal values, the assumption being that wealth will bring happiness and meaning, although many of them had no clear idea about what they wanted to do with their lives. For many, unfortunately, despite the debt that they incurred, and the average debt for a 4-year undergraduate degree is between $30,000 to $40,000, it didn't provide the opportunities they anticipated. In a 2024 report, more than half of recent graduates were underemployed a year after they graduate. That meant they were in jobs that didn't require a degree. A decade after graduation, 45% of them didn't have a job that required a degree. Interestingly enough, in 2022, Barnard did a research study of evangelicals and showed that 70% gave up their faith after they attended college. With regard to what's taught in college, it's important to recognize that a majority of faculty in elite colleges identify as very liberal. 80% at Harvard, 77% at Yale. A 2023 survey of seniors at Princeton said that 44% of their views shifted further to the left while they were there. So our children don't typically choose to go to college because the goal is to find their place and meaning in the alternative culture of Christian community. If they felt they had a calling to serve the church or the broader community that required a professional degree, of course we would help them. I think of a young lady recently who actually went to 2-year college, got an associate degree in applied science in paramedicine so that she could help in our health center. So what is the alternative? Well, in our senior year, our students are asked to develop a capstone project which includes as many elements of education as possible and to choose something that is of particular interest to them. And for many, this points the way to the career direction that they're going to take. If you go over to where we have our education exhibit, you'll be able to see some of these projects. This year, they were totally extraordinary, and I'll just tell you what they were. One was restoring a horse-drawn carriage. One was apprenticing with one of the last wheelwrights in America to learn how to make carriage wheels, raising a 760-foot timber frame, crafting a full-size porch swing, using welding skills to design novel farm equipment for homesteaders, breaking and training a wild American Mustang for our businesses, using pottery, basket, and weaving skills to make a full-size dinner service, using spinning, weaving, sewing, and leather skills to make clothes, shoes, bags, and a baby cradle, using sewing skills to develop a pattern for a wedding dress that had multiple sizes and multiple variations. The year before, this young lady had made her friend's wedding dress. 5 of the students wrote publishable books, a children's story about a great-grandfather's history, a handbook for training a milk cow, an instructional book about how to plan large dinner events for hundreds of people, an instructional pottery book, a guide to classic bridal gowns, and one boy used the skills that he'd learned in music composition and orchestration to write music and to form a klezmer band that played at the graduation. And the girl who wrote the book on large dinner events made the dessert for 950 people who ate dinner at the graduation. So the thing that struck me about these projects is that none of my university students would have had the opportunity to be able to do any of those projects. But the thing that struck me was that the projects that our children chose not only demonstrated the depth and breadth of knowledge that they had, but it was noticeable that they envisioned projects that were a resource for other people, to help other people and to help people in our small communities around the world. Each of them gave an oral presentation, a short oral presentation. They stood up in front of 1,000 people, which I was very proud of them for doing that, and talked about what it had taken to get the project completed. And it was noticeable that they celebrated the relationships that helped them to persevere through working, reworking, overcoming obstacles and deadlines to get to the place where they finished their project. All thanked their parents for the sacrifice they had made to provide a meaningful education. Several of them indicated they had jobs to go to, some with businesses owned by community members or starting their own cottage industries. Others were intending to further their education in apprenticeships. Some of these children were from the 3rd generation of people in our community. Others were from families who joined us over the years. As I listened to these young people confidently expressing themselves in front of 1,000 people and so enthusiastic about their projects and about their future and so clearly demonstrating abundant fruit in their lives, I thought this is what education is supposed to look like. This is the hope for the future. And I thought of the scripture in Luke which says wisdom is proved right by all her children. And I thought of the words at the entrance to Homestead where it says, where classroom is a life. So I hope you're encouraged, as I am, because our experience shows it's possible to revive education. And I think we absolutely have to revive education because I don't think we can anymore be complacent about what's happening in public education. But it's also good to remember that this program began with just a few families who had the conviction that this was the way to educate their children, in spite of the fact that at the time there was much opposition. Homeschooling was not accepted at the time that they started. But the program has been going for almost 50 years. It's expanded and grown, and now we can be a resource for other people who have the same conviction. So if you do and you need help, you can talk to people over in our education centre, and you can look at the resources. We have a lot of resources over there, curriculum, books. I do want to suggest that there are some books here that you might like. One is Blair Adams' Education Exodus, which is a wonderful book about public school education and homeschool education. Wisdom's Children, which is a book about home education. And my book, Changing Our Minds, which is about the effects of technology on children, but there's also a lot about education in there. So thank you all very much for coming. Remember the good part of the seminar. You do have to remember the bad part, but remember the bad part leads to the good part. Thank you very much.